So why did Aerosmith break up during the 70s?
Can you show me the outtakes?
There's nothing like the internet.
Hello guys, how are you doing? I hope that everyone's having an awesome day. So today I want to talk about why it was the Aerosmith breakup during the 70s. This happened after a show in Cleveland in 1979, but I personally have been revisiting the band's history throughout their many different books and documentaries. So I found all the sections that are talking about this chapter of their history, and I thought it was really interesting to revisit this from their different perspectives. So I've gathered a whole bunch of clips and samples from the books, so take a listen and you come up with your own conclusion. But if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the Aerosmith videos I post. Right now I'm covering all the main outtakes, but I'll be covering other fascinating rare topics from the band's history and their music. So like and subscribe right now to make sure you don't miss any. But let's take a listen, and do let me know in the comments below whose fault it was that the band broke up. What's your perspective? Alright, here we go.
Back in the late 70s, Aerosmith was still mired in the darkest days of their collective drug and alcohol addiction.
We were all dissipating. We were all allowing the music to fade.
I wasn't paying attention to anything except my drug consumption. I was a drug addict dabbling in music as opposed to a musician dabbling in drugs.
And their downward trajectory was becoming brutally evident on stage.
People were paid to be entertained, and Aerosmith didn't entertain anyone. Stephen didn't even speak to the audience. It was sort of a big nothing.
By the time they headed out on the European tour in 1977, Joe and Stephen were full-fledged junkies, often too stoned or too strung out to perform.
I'd play bad not because I was high, I'd play bad because I was dope sick.
We'd done a couple of European tours where, I got dope sick and I still had to go on and play that night, but other people in the band had the dope, and so it wasn't being shared.
Listen, when you're a junkie and you only have so much dope, you want to hoard it for yourself.
I was pissed off at him for not turning me on. I said, I f***ing love you, man, and how could you not turn me on?
Well, if you're really my friend, you'll give it to me. You'd give it to your wife, but you wouldn't give it to me.
What the I mean, it got that bad.
It just built up to the point where stuff started happening on stage between Stephen and Joe.
They were practically fighting on stage during the whole show. Stephen would swing his mic stand and come within inches of Joe's head, and it was so obvious that there was something going on there that, that's all you watched.
And the incestuous warfare was stepped up a notch when Stephen started dating Alyssa Perry's close friend, a New York model and actress named Serinda Fox.
Serinda Fox was married to David Johansen in the New York Dolls. She started coming around with the band and being Alyssa's best friend.
I guess she really had her sights on Stephen, and I guess we were the last to know.
She had lots of moxie and something that I'd never had before, which was a super attitude. She started taking the attention away from Alyssa. So I started having her around more, and that separated Joe and I even more, because Alyssa hated Serinda. So I married her.
It was very volatile. All this fighting between Alyssa and Serinda, it was unbearable.
A soap opera. It was Aerosmith Place.
I used to think maybe Alyssa's in love with Stephen and Surenda's in love with Joe. Maybe Stephen and Joe are really in love with each other.
Then the domestic strife started spreading through the rest of the band. By 1979, all 5 band members had their wives traveling with them on the road. Aerosmith had degenerated into one long, drawn-out, drug-induced family feud.
If you have everyone in the family taking alcohol and drugs, and a few of them not getting along together at all, I mean, can you imagine the effect of that?
You couldn't go in certain places with other husbands and wives because the wife vibe was so bad. You'd be backstage and nobody would talk to each other. It was not fun.
And it just got to a point where, I mean, you could drop something on somebody's foot by accident and they would take it the wrong way and it'd be a huge blow-up.
We should have just taken a vacation, you know? I mean, we all needed a break. But it came as an implosion.
On July 28, 1979, after a sold-out show at Cleveland Stadium, the animosity that had been building for 9 years finally came to a head over a glass of spilled milk.
Joe Perry's wife and Tom Hamilton's wife get into this huge fight, throwing things at each other.
Somebody throws something at you, you throw something back.
I threw the milk.
It was a major fight, and Joe perpetuated that fight.
It was just the same, and somebody's wife was complaining.
I saw it as, you know, what are they even doing here? You know, he didn't see that. How can you with this entity that is bigger than any single person here?
It was like the classic straw broke the camel's back. It was just so ironic that it was something as cliche as spilled milk.
We had a meeting. He said maybe I should split. And everybody kind of nodded.
And I said, that's it. I can't do this anymore. I just can't, you know, put up with this pressure cooker.
Joe Perry got into his limo and drove off in disgust. It would be years before he saw the members of Aerosmith again.
We blamed it on the girlfriends, and it's really not about the girlfriends. It's about the guys in the relationships, you know? It's easy to sit there and blame everybody else, but really we let stuff get out of hand.
And I just couldn't believe the dream was over.
By the time Aerosmith released Draw the Line in 1977, the band's appetite for drugs had eclipsed their thirst for success. Strangely, the album's title mirrored Aerosmith's day-to-day existence.
We were just fortunate enough not to get that one batch of bad drugs. I just didn't drive off the road.
It's quite easy to kill yourself. You forget how frail the human body is.
We were so stoned back then that it takes up so much of your mind that you forget that you're in a band and you're human beings. It took away from me, it stole.
All of a sudden, this close huddle that I was used to was, you know, not happening anymore.
And really started to become a factor in people showing up for work or being able to work. How do you deal with that?
On tour, Aerosmith was still a huge draw, but their loyal Blue Army of fans were witnessing a band on the edge. Back in the studio, it was the same old song and dance.
We tried doing it the way we usually did, which was go in there and get as up as we could. It just didn't work that way anymore.
I would listen to a song that Joe and I were writing when the din had worn off, or whatever it was I was taking, and go, holy, what is this? What is this crap? I mean, this doesn't work at all. It's not a song, it's terrible.
Stephen and Joe had lost what brought them together in the beginning, their music. In its place, a constant craving for drugs.
Joe, with all his brashness and F-all, he'd have the dope and I didn't. I'd be sick, banging on his door. Come on, man, I'm dope sick.
Now I'm kind of like, well, what are you out there yelling at me for?
He didn't care, and I remained pissed off all these years.
The brewing tensions within Aerosmith came to an ugly head backstage after a sold-out gig in Cleveland in 1979. Sick as a dog with life in an increasingly out-of-control band, Joe Perry declared he'd finally had enough and quit.
I was just so pissed at the moment. I don't think I ever gave it a lot of thought. You know, did I really hate Steven? Did I really hate the other guys in the band? I don't even think I thought about it. All I felt was that there was just too much tension. I couldn't do that anymore. Or maybe if we had been a little more mature about it, we would have just taken a vacation. But instead, you know, there was ego and we let it all happen.
I had a relationship with Joe that, unlike any relationship with anybody else, I dreamt for, I prayed for meeting somebody like this. But I didn't have him. It was over.
Aerosmith as they knew it was over. But were they doomed to fall into rock and roll obscurity? Or could they somehow jumpstart their career? An unforeseen phone call would decide their fate.
Meanwhile, Joe's marriage to Alyssa was one of the factors continuing to drive a wedge between Aerosmith's two band leaders.
There were all sorts of feuds, but when the drugs are toxic, the behavior becomes toxic.
We were pretty burned out, and instead of taking the vacation, we let loose on each other.
And I think as the fame increased, drugs increased, and the issues between Steven and Joe diminished the creativity between the two of them, the later 70s became a hard time.
Infighting and substance abuse were driving Aerosmith apart. Then, at a July 1979 concert, the band reached a crisis point.
It's July 1979. Aerosmith is in Cleveland. No one's getting along very well. People were grouchy. Everyone said the gig sucked. Backstage, after this gig, Joe's wife, Alyssa, got into it with Tom Hamilton's wife, Terry, and some milk was thrown. There was a battle that involved spilt milk, and Joe Perry walked out and left Aerosmith.
Kind of shows how ludicrous it was that it was actually over the cliche of the spilt milk.
Joe really perceived as the breaking point, the final straw, that now his wife was getting disrespected and that these guys just couldn't operate as a unit anymore. And after that show, he stormed backstage to Steven's dressing room and they got into a big fight and he said, "That's it, I'm done, I'm out of here." And Steven said, "You should be out of here, this is finished, I'm never playing with you again." And, you know, everybody thought that was the end of the band.
1979 had to be one of the lowest years of my life. Approaching 29, I felt disgusted on all sorts of levels. I realized that my marriage had hit a dead end, but I didn't have the wherewithal to end it. I realized the band's drugging and drinking, including my own, was out of hand. Yet no one felt any compunction to curb it. Musically, the band was on cruise control. We were playing the same shit we'd been playing for years. If Steven and I had found a way to deal with our differences, that would have helped. But we were farther apart than ever. He saw Alyssa and my willingness to lose myself in my relationship with her as the cause of Aerosmith's problems. The band members never addressed these problems. We never had open and frank discussions about what was wrong. Instead, Alyssa was used as the scapegoat for many Aerosmith issues. I was never part of the boys' club. I had no fondness for the after-show blowjob room. While I liked losing myself in chemicals, losing myself in anonymous sexual mayhem was not my style. I'm a one-woman man. The insanity of our tour, record cycle was going into its 8th year. What was required was creative renewal. We needed fresh energy and new ideas. That's when we started planning the next record. The struggle was more monumental than ever. The 5 of us were able to come up with a bunch of song ideas. That happened at the Warehouse in Waltham. Then when we went to Media Sound in New York to record the tracks, Steven was there to help out with the arrangements and the recording. I thought we cut some of the best tracks we'd ever done. The guitar interplay between Brad and me broke new ground. Everyone was at the top of his game. When it came time for lyrics and vocals, though, Steven began to drift away. Slowly, progress ground to a halt. I started to get annoyed, then aggravated, then out-and-out pissed. I'd been working these tracks along with Tom, Brad, and Joey. They were hot. For example, I was switching between bottleneck to a 6-string on a lap steel on something called Cheesecake. But nothing could be finished without Steven. Weeks went by, then months. This was when Lieber Krebs decided to hold one of their rare meetings to review our financial status. "The band is broke," said Krebs, "and you'll have to do some festivals in between recording your new album." We had never done that before. When we toured, we toured. When we recorded, we recorded. That was our ironclad ritual. When I objected to changing the long-established routine, David Krebs said we had no choice. Beyond being broke, each of us owed money for our in-room hotel charges from previous tours. I wondered how in hell that could be. We'd headlined some of the biggest festivals in the history of rock and roll. We'd been selling out arenas for years. We'd made untold millions. Where did it all go? What about the merchandise and all the publishing money? Krebs gave a long answer that sounded like double talk. "If what you say is true," I said, "at least show us the paperwork that proves your point." Nothing he had made any sense to me. It got worse. "Joe, personally, you owe $180,000 in room service charges." "If we're so broke," I said, "how am I going to get that kind of money?" "Make a solo album," he suggested. That thought had never occurred to me before. I had never thought about doing an album on my own any more than I had thought about leaving the band. At this moment, though, I did have one thought. Come hell or high water, I was getting my own lawyer and putting him on the case. Meanwhile, we had to finish the album that would be called Night in the Ruts. We went to work every day, spending a fortune on hotel bills and studio time with nothing to show for it. We were still waiting for Stephen to do his job, write the lyrics and sing them. I couldn't comprehend why Stephen was taking so fucking long. A fruitless pattern was set. We'd wander into the studio late in the afternoon. We'd hoped Stephen might have completed a song, but he hadn't. So we waited some more. By early evening, the dealers would show up, letting us sample their best stuff with the hopes of scoring a big sale. No problem there. We'd get high and the party would start, and still no Stephen. Tired of waiting and disgusted with the band's inability to complete the record, I packed up and went back home to Boston. With the Lieber Krebs money mess in my mind, I called a lawyer to intervene on my behalf. I needed my own representative. I needed to know where the money had gone. We had several meetings and my hopes were high. But my hopes were soon dashed when I saw how Lieber Krebs totally overpowered the lawyer. It was the same scenario as when I had introduced Alyssa's attorney cousin into the mix. Given Lieber Krebs' powerful position in the music business, lawyers were easily intimidated. We stopped discussing an audit, leaving me in the dark about where the money had gone. I still couldn't comprehend being broke. Back in Boston, Alyssa and other friends encouraged me to go out on my own. What a concept. The notion became more and more appealing. It felt like freedom. I'd be free not to give a shit whether Stephen showed up or not. The band's dysfunction had come to a junction. Bluesman Robert Johnson might have sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads, but I was feeling like I had no soul left to sell. My soul had been smoked up, snorted up, drugged up, and fucked up. My soul was in tatters. I wanted off the road, but management said we owed so much money that we couldn't afford to stop doing what we had been doing ever since the start of our musical enterprise. We had to keep playing, keep touring, go back to the Midwest, back to California, back to Texas, playing big venues, big festivals, big crowds of fans who wanted to see the band. We had to keep going at any cost. There was no way to stop the machine. There was no way to get off the merry-go-round. But another real problem was that I was addicted to excitement. After all, that was what we had been working for. We were living the dream. I had to keep going, until I finally realized when push came to shove, I could do whatever I wanted. I had a choice. I could just fucking quit. I had been harboring an illusion for a long time that I didn't want to shatter. The illusion was that no matter what, I could put up with the band and the band could put up with me. The illusion was that I could stay with this band while also staying with Alyssa. I was pissed off by her high school antics, but maybe deep down part of me approved of her misbehavior. Whatever my ambivalence, I stood by and watched her verbally attack the guys and their wives and girlfriends. When I talked about leaving the band, Alyssa had no ambivalence about supporting me. She was certain I could make it on my own. The fact that Stephen couldn't finish his lyrics and vocals to complete Night in the Ruts frustrated me to no end. I knew it was hard for him, but the drugs were making it worse. And why was I the only guy in the band willing to put the screws to management and demand a detailed explanation of how in hell we could possibly be broke? Something was fucked up. Everything was fucked up. Then came the infamous episode during the summer tour of 1979 that has fallen into the realm of mythology. The story has been told 100 times from 100 points of view. My point of view is vague. I know it happened during a July gig in Cleveland at an outdoor stadium during the World Series of Rock. Nugent and AC/DC were on the bill, and so were Thin Lizzy and Journey, all opening for us. We played our set. At one point, someone threw a small vial of powder on stage. Steven picked it up and shot me a glance. He poured some on the mic, and we dared each other to go first. I forgot who took the first whiff, but we both sampled it. We were laughing pretty hard over the roll of the dice. It turned out to be weak blow. When we got off stage, I learned that there had been a vicious confrontation between Alyssa and Terry, Tom's wife. Terry was a great chick. She spoke her mind. I liked her. I hated hearing that Alyssa had thrown a glass of milk at her. Fortunately, no one was physically injured, but the emotional damage was nasty as it could be. Steven ran in and started accusing me. I hadn't even been there when the fight happened, but that wasn't good enough for Steven. He was saying that my inability to keep Alyssa on a short leash was the problem. Let's get out of here, was all I said to Alyssa. That's the night I walked away from Aerosmith. Alyssa and I went back to Boston. I guess it was loyalty that let me stay with Alyssa. She was my wife, and for what it was worth, I still valued the commitment we made to each other. Part of me probably knew that what had happened in Cleveland was the last straw. For years, Alyssa had caused bullshit that put the band members at odds. But the truth is that the band never sat down and talked about our problems. When we would try to confront each other or explain our feelings, we'd wind up screaming. It was the band that broke up the band, not any outsider. None of us was willing to take a hard look at ourselves and our issues. Rather than look in the mirror, it was easier to lay it flat, snort what was on it, and blame it on someone else. I stayed put. I stewed. I thought long and hard. I had dozens and dozens of demo tapes that had gone nowhere, mainly because Tyler never bothered to put lyrics to them. No matter how intense my relationship to drugs, I didn't lose my drive to keep making music. The choice I faced wasn't whether to go on making music or not. It was a foregone conclusion that I would, but whether to make that music with or without Aerosmith. Continuing with Aerosmith meant working with a management team I had not trusted for years. It meant playing with bandmates who had angry resentments against each other. It meant playing with Steven, whose drugged-out ways, though no more extreme than mine, triggered his resentment of me. The whole operation had become a nightmare. I was tired of the bullshit. I just wanted to get in a van and go play rock and roll. I was willing to play clubs, any clubs. If there were 100 people as opposed to 100,000, fine. If there were 40, fine. I'd find a few good musicians and just get out there. No complications, no weird management, no drama. Just music. Just go out there as another rock and roll pirate and do what I do.
Between Joe and me, there had always been a certain amount of friction due to the biological fact that we're such different personalities. But whatever stories you've read or Joe and everyone else has told, the $80,000 room service bill, the spilt milk, the solo album, the truth of the matter is that after 9 years of playing, writing, and recording together, I still couldn't get through to Joe. He was in his bubble and I couldn't reach him. He was insulated by heroin, by Alyssa, by his own fucked up lack of self-confidence, his inability to see that the band was bigger than his girlfriend, more important than his problems, his drugs. He has a great front, Joe. He seems so cool, but then don't we all? He needed his woman, Alyssa, who was cool and gorgeous and poisonous. Alyssa was very caught up in that whole fashion thing, a model wannabe kind of girl, coming back from England with beavers and the black nail polish and all that kind of stuff. Joe was into role-playing as well, and they fed off of each other. They were always into each other's games. She was so into herself and was easy to provoke. Once we were flying from New York to L.A., we're all sitting in first class, and there's a guy behind us. He leans over, taps Alyssa on the shoulder, and goes, "Are you what they call a groupie?" She took a glass of wine and threw it on this guy, and that was before the plane even took off. The coup de grace came when I began to confront Joe about the wall he'd built around himself. I'd had enough. "Joe, do you know who you are?" "Yeah," he mumbled. "There's 100 girls tonight that would have sucked your cock until 1,000,000 o'clock. Are you kidding?" I said. "Well, Alyssa loves me," he mumbled back. "Oh, okay. No one else does?" "But Alyssa I can trust." "Wow. All right, okay. That's it? That's the end of the story?" Joe didn't know his own self-worth. He didn't get how strong a personality he was on stage. A character right out of rock mythology. The electric god who wants his guitar to sound like a dinosaur eating cars. How great is that? And together, we were the terrible, toxic twins. But he could never see that, so in the end, he left with her. The straw that broke the camel's back came on July 28, 1979, at the World Series of Rock at the Cleveland Stadium. We were the headliners on a bill with Ted Nugent, Journey, Thin Lizzy, and AC/DC. Backstage in the trailer, Alyssa and Terry Hamilton got into a flaming fight. Alyssa took a glass of milk and chucked it all over Terry. I wasn't there. I heard about it after the show. "What's going on?" I said. Then I got into a fight with Joe. Joe and I weren't there when the Big Bang occurred. We didn't physically see it. We came off stage into this Winnebago parked in the back of this hall. I walked in, panting and dripping, soaking wet, and Alyssa and Terry were screaming at each other. "Get the fuck out of here," I yelled. "Can't you see we're working in here?" That's when I found out that Alyssa had thrown milk at Terry, and Terry just wouldn't have it. Alyssa would take no shit from anybody and got off on being that way. And neither would Terry. Tom was spewing. Joe walked in and started sticking up for Alyssa, but when I saw Terry's clothes all soaked, I got into it with Joe. "Man, can't you come over here and control your woman? Why does it always have to be like this? Worse than me, and I'm the king of that. Always starting fights and bullshitting, but she did that, and it's what broke up the band that night." Joe was acting like it was Alyssa's right to do what she did, and he sang as much while Terry's still in the room. Didn't care. He liked that his wife was a troublemaker. He got off knowing that Alyssa could morph into a flaming bitch at the drop of a mad hat. I was so drunk, as I was every night after a show, but I remember clearly being on the steps of the trailer, walking down and yelling at Joe, "You're fucking fired." I don't even know where that chairman of the board voice came from. Never spouted off like I was the leader of this band. We were a gang, a unit, but I was just so angry. That was the only way I knew how to get Alyssa to stop it. "You're fucking fired, Joe." You can get into a crazy headspace where all you want to say is, "Fuck you." I could have just said, "I'm out of here," but I didn't. Instead, I said, "You're fired." Those were the words. I've never actually punched Joe, but that night, I came really close. It was a mess. So much of this is just so radically true. We completely fried ourselves. But again, unlike Sid Vicious or the Dolls and other bands that were systematically sabotaging their careers and lives, if one was to spell it out clinically, we are going down that road unconsciously. We're just getting fucked up and, incidentally, sabotaging ourselves. Joe and I had that mulish Italian strain of stick-to-itiveness. Joe's not actually Italian, but he's from that island off the coast of Italy. Or is it Portugal? With the exception of his guitar volume, he sure the hell doesn't know how to be loud. And who the fuck knows how happy he was that night? I sure wasn't. And thus ended Aerosmith Mach 1. It was an insane thing to do after all we'd done to make it, but I had gotten so enraged. I'd now destroyed the one thing that had made Aerosmith so powerful. That fine tension that created Aerosmith's feral howl. It didn't matter to Joe that he and I were a team. He didn't care that we'd been together for almost 10 years. All he cared about was getting high and being with her. I was that angry with him, so I went, "Fuck you, you're fired. I'm gonna find a new guitar player." And I did. Jimmy Crespo. At least he wasn't Joe Perry, the cocksucker.
There was, on paper, a fantastic made-for-TMZ drama that happened on that July day in 1979, and with a headline to kill for, Aerosmith breaks up over spilled milk. And it is technically correct. A tiff between Alyssa Perry and Terry Hamilton did occur backstage and was punctuated by the guitarist's wife tossing a calcium-rich glass of liquid at the bassist's wife. But Aerosmith's collapse was already well underway. Joe Perry blames the drugs. "I remember it as being just a progressive thing," said Perry. "It's insidious. It creeps up on you. If you listen to some tapes of our live shows, you can start to hear it encroaching. It's a slow decline." Aerosmith fell apart for the same reason almost every band does. The tension that sparks so much creativity can be tolerated, even celebrated, when you're young, hungry, and have everything to gain. That tension becomes a millstone when you're stars. You begin to believe you can do it alone, that you don't need all the baggage that comes with carrying on this musical brotherhood. The death usually takes place in public, with thousands watching, internal squabbles turned into the performance itself. Phil Everly smashing his guitar and storming up the stage he shared with brother Don. Glenn Frey captured on the mic threatening Don Felder as the Eagles come apart. Paul Simon recording a comeback record with Art Garfunkel, and then after a spat, stripping his musical partner's vocals off the tracks. After it's over, the forensic team rushes in. "You remember the movie Rashomon," said Krebs? "It's about a murder. There were 8 or 9 witnesses. Every witness had a different recollection. That's what a rock and roll band's story is, especially after time passes." The Spilled Milk Show does provide a window into just how unpleasant life in Aerosmith had become. They came to Cleveland's Lakefront Stadium as superstars, the headliners of an event called the World Series of Rock. They were to follow AC/DC, Journey, Thin Lizzy, Ted Nugent and the Scorpions. The night before, Aerosmith stopped by WMMS, the city's influential FM station. John Gorman, the veteran program director, was working on the station's plans for the festival. He popped his head into an office and saw Tyler, on all fours, snorting a line of cocaine that looked long enough to be a mile marker, he later wrote. The next day would be no better. By then, lyric sheets would be taped all over the stage for Tyler. Aerosmith had gone from being a band that we were proud of, that made every show, to a band we could never be sure if we were going to cancel the next show, said Krebs. It took me a long time to figure that out. Photographer Bob Wallen, holding his Canon AE-1, had fond memories of Aerosmith live, dating back to a killer bill with Montrose 5 years earlier. This time, Wallen didn't like what he saw as he peered through his zoom. Tyler looked sloppy and wasted. He screwed up the intro to Back in the Saddle, forcing the band to start over 3 times. Then he fell. Perry didn't look smashed, but you could see the look on his face, said Wallen, pissed and disgusted. If anything, the backstage brawl over the milk seemed to bring Tyler back to life. He got right in the middle, shouting that Perry needed to get control of his woman. The guitarist walked out. He was never one to side with band over woman. Not now, not ever. Everybody figured Perry would be back, until he wasn't.
The band was on the road. I was out in California staying with Sandy Johnson, my old buddy from Hebrew school, and we'd been drugging pretty heavily and then went to bed. A few hours later, I got up and walked out the front door and down the street. Only I was sound asleep. I sleep in the buff, so here I was sleepwalking through a luxury beach town, buck naked. That's a pretty good image for this whole period in my life. The whole wedding, when April and I got married, was a blur. Sandy was my best man, and we had a rabbi for the service in the backyard of my parents' house in Eastchester. We had the reception at the New Rochelle Beach Club, but it was like they had booked 2 different parties at the same place on the same afternoon. My parents' friends were at the bar or out on the dance floor doing the hora, and the people from the music business were buzzing back and forth to the Johns snorting coke. At least I had the good sense to spend some time with April's little girl, Asia, who was 5 years old at the time. She stood on the tops of my feet as we danced. That was the best part of the whole affair. One of the few things that registered clearly was a shitload of lobster tail and filet mignon going back to the kitchen uneaten. The big appetite for blow did a very good job of replacing any appetite there may have been for food. We did a lot of that, passing up some of the good things in life in order to jam the pleasure chemicals directly into the brain. They say lab mice will keep pressing the little bar that gives them a dose of coke until they die. If the drug's freely available, the mice won't bother to eat. Looking back, we were hardly different from mice. All the guys at the reception were coming up to me, handing me envelopes, small ones, uniquely folded with no checks in them. These were single-gram envelopes of coke. By the time we left, I must have had a good half ounce on me. We stayed at a hotel in New York the first night, coked up and awake all night. We then headed to the Bahamas for our honeymoon, which just shows how out of it we were. Who the hell goes to the Bahamas in June? When we came back, it was to the fiasco of our summer tour, bickering on stage and the milk-in-the-face catfight at Cleveland Stadium. And I was about as sick and tired of the same old bullshit as Joe was sick and tired of it. When he asked me to leave the band and sign on with the Joe Perry project, I told him that I would, but only if he got David Hull to play bass. David was a friend of mine who at the time was playing with the Buddy Miles Express. Joe went after him and got him, but by then I had changed my mind. I had sussed it out and realized where my true loyalty was.